What if I told you that the fate of the ancient world once rested in the hands of a woman who spoke 9 languages, commanded armies, and seduced the most powerful men in Rome, not with beauty alone, but with a mind so brilliant it terrified emperors? Picture this. It's 48 BCE. A 21-year-old woman is fleeing for her life through the scorching Egyptian desert. Her own brother has betrayed her, stolen her throne, and ordered her execution. She has no army, no allies, and no apparent way back to power. Most people in her position would accept defeat, disappear into history's footnotes, and live out their days in exile. But Cleopatra VII was not most people. As the sun set over the Mediterranean that fateful evening, a Persian rug was delivered to Julius Caesar's quarters in Alexandria. The most powerful man in the world, fresh from his conquest of Egypt, was about to receive a gift that would change the course of history. When his guards unrolled the carpet, out tumbled not treasure or tribute, but a woman, a queen, a legend in the making. This is the story of how one woman's intelligence, charisma, and strategic genius nearly rewrote the map of the ancient world. Born in 69 BCE into the Ptolemaic dynasty, a Greek family that had ruled Egypt for nearly 3 centuries, Cleopatra grew up in a palace where murder was a family tradition. Her ancestors had perfected the art of sibling assassination, and by the time she was a teenager, she'd witnessed more political intrigue than most people experience in a lifetime. While other princesses learned embroidery, Cleopatra studied mathematics, philosophy, astronomy, and languages. She was the first Ptolemaic ruler in 300 years who bothered to learn Egyptian, the language of the people she would govern. But knowledge alone doesn't keep you alive in a den of vipers. When her father died in 51 BCE, 18-year-old Cleopatra ascended to the throne alongside her 10-year-old brother, Ptolemy XIII, as was Egyptian custom. It was a partnership doomed from the start. Behind her brother stood powerful advisors who saw the intelligent young queen as a threat to their control. They whispered poison in the boy king's ear. She's too ambitious, too clever, too dangerous. Within 3 years, they'd succeeded. Cleopatra was forced to flee Egypt, exiled by her own family, watching from across the border as her kingdom slipped away. Most rulers would have raised an army. Cleopatra did something far more audacious. She bet everything on one man, Julius Caesar. When Caesar arrived in Alexandria pursuing his rival Pompey, he found himself in the middle of a civil war between the royal siblings. Cleopatra knew this was her only chance. But how do you get an audience with the most powerful man in the world when your enemies control the palace, the guards, and every entrance to the city? You get creative. That rolled-up carpet wasn't just theatrical flair, it was strategic genius. Cleopatra understood something fundamental about power. The boldest move is often the winning move. By appearing before Caesar in such an unexpected, vulnerable, yet audacious manner, she immediately distinguished herself from every other supplicant he'd ever encountered. She wasn't begging for help. She was announcing herself as an equal. And Caesar, a man who'd conquered Gaul and crossed the Rubicon, was captivated. But here's what Hollywood always gets wrong. Cleopatra didn't seduce Caesar with batting eyelashes and perfume. She seduced him with conversation about military strategy, Egyptian economics, and political philosophy. Ancient historians tell us she was not conventionally beautiful. Her power lay in her voice, her wit, and her irresistible charm. She could discuss Greek philosophy one moment and Egyptian theology the next, switching between languages as easily as most people breathe. Caesar didn't just fall for Cleopatra. He recognized a kindred spirit, someone who understood power, strategy, and the long game. Together, they defeated Ptolemy XIII, who drowned in the Nile during battle, and Cleopatra reclaimed her throne. She gave birth to Caesar's son, Caesarion, cementing an alliance between Rome and Egypt that would reshape the Mediterranean world. But fate had other plans. March 15th, 44 BCE, the Ides of March. Julius Caesar was assassinated on the Senate floor in Rome, stabbed 23 times by men he'd called friends. In one bloody afternoon, Cleopatra's entire strategy collapsed. She was alone again, ruling a wealthy kingdom surrounded by Roman wolves circling for the kill. The question wasn't if Rome would come for Egypt, it was which Roman would get there first. Enter Mark Antony. If Caesar had been Cleopatra's strategic partner, Antony became her soulmate in ambition. One of Rome's most celebrated generals, Antony summoned the Egyptian queen to Tarsus in 41 BCE to answer questions about her loyalty. Once again, Cleopatra understood the assignment. She arrived on a golden barge with purple sails, dressed as the goddess Aphrodite, surrounded by servants dressed as cupids. The entire city turned out to watch. It was pageantry, propaganda, and power politics rolled into one unforgettable entrance. Antony was supposed to interrogate her. Instead, he fell completely under her spell. But again, this wasn't just romance. This was strategy. Cleopatra and Antony formed a political and military alliance that threatened to split the Roman Empire in half. Together, they dreamed of creating a new power center in the East, with Alexandria, not Rome, as its capital. They had children together, distributed kingdoms to their offspring, and built an empire that stretched from Egypt to Armenia. For a moment, it seemed possible. The charismatic strategist of the Nile had done it again. But Rome doesn't forgive ambition easily. Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir, saw Antony and Cleopatra as existential threats to Roman supremacy. He launched a propaganda campaign, painting Cleopatra as a foreign seductress who'd corrupted a noble Roman general. He declared war not on Antony, a Roman citizen, but on Cleopatra, framing the conflict as Rome versus Egypt, civilization versus barbarism. The final confrontation came at the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE. Cleopatra and Antony's forces faced Octavian's fleet in a naval engagement that would determine the fate of the ancient world. When the battle turned against them, Cleopatra made the controversial decision to retreat with her ships, and Antony followed her. It was the beginning of the end. Octavian pursued them to Alexandria. Antony, receiving false news that Cleopatra had died, fell on his sword. He was carried, dying, to Cleopatra's mausoleum, where he died in her arms. Cleopatra was now truly alone, facing capture by Octavian, who planned to parade her in Rome in chains as a trophy of conquest. The charismatic strategist of the Nile had one final move to make. On August 12, 30 BCE, Cleopatra VII, the last pharaoh of Egypt, died by her own hand, most likely from poison, though legend says it was an asp's bite. She was 39 years old. She dressed in her royal regalia, ensuring she would die as she had lived, a queen. Octavian got his victory, but Cleopatra denied him his triumph. She would not be paraded through Rome. She would not be humiliated. Even in death, she controlled her own narrative. With her death, Egypt became a Roman province, and 3,000 years of pharaonic rule ended forever. But here's why Cleopatra's story still matters today. She was a woman who refused to accept the limitations placed on her by gender, by circumstance, or by fate. She spoke 9 languages in a world where most rulers couldn't speak 2. She commanded armies, negotiated with emperors, and nearly changed the course of Western civilization, not through force alone, but through intelligence, charisma, and strategic genius. Cleopatra reminds us that true power isn't about physical strength or inherited privilege. It's about adaptability, courage, and the audacity to roll yourself up in a carpet when that's what the moment demands. The charismatic strategist of the Nile lost her final gamble, but she won something far more valuable: immortality. Her story asks us, when faced with impossible odds, will you accept defeat, or will you find a way to rewrite the rules entirely?